Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So I've had the Win600 in my hands for about a month now, and I've been messing around with it for this whole time, and I gotta say, this thing has kind of been growing on me. Now, all the issues I had with this device when I first got it are still present. For example, the ergonomics when using the analog sticks are still very poor. Additionally, the price to performance on this device is pretty low. The retail price is between $300 and $400. And finally, the battery performance on this is not great. I would expect about 2 hours of gameplay right out of the box. Now, despite all of these issues, the little device has kind of been growing on me. Part of that is the fact that when you play it in the right context, it actually is a lot of fun. For example, when playing D-pad centric games, the ergonomics issue just kind of goes away. And if you're willing to do some tweaks, particularly within Windows, you can get a lot better performance than out of the box. And so that's what we're going to do in this video today. We're going to walk you through how to install a fresh version of Windows 11 onto this device, and then how to set up some key tools that'll allow you to tweak this device to get you the best performance with the best battery life as well. Now, in my initial review of this device, I said that I preferred using SteamOS over Windows. But over the past month, as I've grown more familiar with these tools, I've actually kept it on Windows this whole time. And of course, for my retro gaming and emulation, I'm still sticking with Batocera like I did in my review. So in this video, we're going to focus on Windows PC gaming specifically. And I'll likely do a Batocera setup video sometime in the future. But for now, let's stick with Windows. And so without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, first point I want to make is that there is a written guide available on my website. I'll have it linked below. It'll walk you through all the things we're doing in this video here. And of course, it's going to have links to everything that you need, and I'll also update it as time marches on, because I expect that I'm going to find more tools and more ways to tweak the device in the future. So just make sure you check out that written guide for the most up-to-date information. And so we're going to start with the RAM. Your device will come with an 8GB module. It may not be a Lenovo brand, it may be a Chinese knockoff as far as what I've seen. Regardless, it'll probably be rated at 2666 MHz, but the thing is, the stock BIOS actually sets it to 24 MHz, so we're going to adjust it here in this video. Also, if you're willing to spend $30 for an upgrade, you could get a RAM module that's been clocked at 3200 MHz. And this is the one that I'm using in my device specifically, and I will also leave this linked in my written guide. And given the fact that this device is only capable of single channel RAM, I think that using a higher frequency RAM module like this one will probably give you a better advantage as well. And so let me show you how to change the frequency of your RAM module regardless of what module you have. To start, go ahead and boot up the device, and as soon as it lights up, go ahead and press the volume down button. From here, switch the input toggle on the right to the keyboard and mouse input, and then select Enter Setup. This will take you to the BIOS menu here. It'll be in portrait mode, so go ahead and rotate your screen like this. From here, just go and tab over to the Advanced section, and then scroll all the way down to AMD CBS. From here, pick the third option, which is UMC Common Options. From there, select DDR4 Common Options, then DRAM Timing Configuration. This is going to give you a warning screen here. Just go ahead and scroll down all the way and then select I accept. From here, make sure that you turn the overclock on and then go to the Memory Clock Speed section. In here, you're going to want to adjust the clock depending on the frequency of your RAM module. If you're using a 2666 MHz one, like the one that came with your device, then change the clock speed to 1333. And if you upgrade to a 3200 MHz module, then change it to 1800 MHz here. And that's it. You can actually overclock it more if you wanted to, but we're just going to keep it safe and play with the manufacturer specs. From here, just back out to the main menu, then go over to Save and Exit, and then Save and Exit. Now, the device ships with Windows 10, but we're actually going to put a clean install of Windows 11 on this device. And this is a pretty easy setup and 100% free because your product license will carry over onto Windows 11. Now, to help us get started, what we're going to do is actually download some drivers that'll help us later on when we install Windows 11. The first website we're going to go to is win.anbernic.com. We're going to go into the download section here, and then scroll down till you find that download now button. And this will take us to a downloads page here. It'll have some instructions in here, just scroll past all of it. Instead, you want to go to the drive package section. Here you're going to find a single Google Drive link, which will take you to a package that's about 362 megabytes altogether. What you want to do is download this zip file and then put it on a flash drive for later. Same thing here, you want to go into the AMD website and download the most recent version of their auto detect software to install the graphics drivers as well. And then finally, we'll go to the Microsoft Windows 11 11 website, and there's two different ways you can install Windows 11. The first is the Installation Assistant, which will just download and install Windows 11 on your device. The other option here is to actually make a boot drive so that you can actually just flash it from a USB drive. And you can choose whichever one you would like, but I would recommend doing a clean install as opposed to just writing it over your current Windows 10 image. Now, I'm not going to walk you through that entire process because it's very bare bones and simple, just follow the prompts. And so once you have Windows 11 installed, let's go ahead and install all those drivers to make sure everything functions properly. Inside that zip file that we downloaded previously, you're going to find a bunch of folders, and within here, you're going to have some install batch files. And installing these drivers is super simple. All you do is right-click on them here and then select Run as Administrator. You might get a pop-up asking you to confirm, and from there, you'll see a little pop-up at the bottom from a command prompt. And after a second, it's just going to disappear. And even though you don't have any confirmation, it is installing the drivers. So just go ahead and repeat this process for all of those folders within here. And after you're done with all of those, I recommend restarting your system. And then finally, make sure you install that AMD tool as well, and make sure that it has the most updated version of the drivers here as well. And really, that's about it. You just need to install the Anbernic drivers and then the AMD drivers to make sure your graphics are up to date. So now let's talk about some of the tools. We're going to start with one here, which is called the Custom Resolution Utility. And all these are going to be linked in the written guide in case you want to resource them there. Now, this tool can do two things. Number one, it can give you customized resolutions, but then also it can adjust the refresh rate to whatever you'd like. And so here, all you have to do is download the zip file, then unzip it, and this is what the folder will look like here. And to get this working, all you have to do is open the CRU app, and then you'll find the detailed resolutions up here on the top right. Now, I've already created 4 different ones here, and these are the 4 that I recommend you create as well. You're going to have the default resolution at 60 Hz refresh rate, and you'll want to make another one that's 40 Hz. Additionally, we're going to make 2 others at a lower resolution as well. And so altogether, you should have 4 different resolutions to work with. 2 that are 1280 by 720, and then 2 that are 960 by 540. So let me show you how to create one of these. I'm going to delete my 40 Hz one here, and then I'll just go ahead and recreate it here. What I'm going to do is press the Add button, and then I don't need to adjust the resolution because I'm going to keep it at 720 and 1280. All I really have to do is adjust the refresh rate to 40 Hz. And yeah, there you go. Now I've created a 720p resolution with a 40 Hz refresh rate. I'm going to go ahead and move it up so that it's in the correct order. And so you just want to do that and then also make it for 540 by 960. And I'll show off why these are important here later in this video. For now, just make sure that you create these 4 resolutions and you're good to go. In fact, after you're done, you never have to open this app ever again. Okay, next let's talk about the on-screen keyboard. There's an app here which will replace the default one, which is the black one here, with the nicer Windows 11 style one. Now in Windows 11, if you press this little keyboard button, it will pop up this nice keyboard right here. However, the Win600 has a keyboard button on the right of it, and if you press that keyboard button, you're going to get the old keyboard instead. And this keyboard works, but it's kind of clunky and not meant for a touchscreen input, so we're going to replace that one specifically. And so once you've downloaded that app, it's just going to be one single batch file. All you have to do is just open it right up, and then it'll actually start the auto installation process. It'll take about 30 seconds altogether. I'm just speeding it up right here, but after it's done, now when you press that keyboard button, it'll pop up that really nice Windows 11 one instead. And one of the nicer things about this Windows 11 one is that you can make it a little bit smaller if you need to see more of your screen. And so that's just a handy feature in case you want to use that button. And finally, the last tool I want to talk about is called the Power Control Panel, and this is the most important one we're going to use here today. And this is kind of a Swiss Army knife application that'll allow you to do all sorts of things, especially using some of those tools we already installed. And this is available for a lot of Windows-based handhelds, including the Win600. And so to install this, just go over to the releases page here and then open up the assets section right here. You're going to have a couple different zip options here. I recommend using the self-contained one because it'll have all of the libraries necessary to run the app. So just go ahead and download and unzip that folder, and then this is what it's going to look like inside. And all you have to do here is open up the Power Control Panel like this. Now this control panel can do a number of different things, so let me walk you through those real quick. First and foremost, you can adjust the brightness right here. It's not going to show anything as I do it because I'm using an external capture card, but it will change on the device. You can also adjust the volume, but you have the volume buttons to do that too. However, one of the most important things here is you can adjust the TDP on the fly like this. In fact, if you go into the settings, you can adjust the max TDP here as well. In addition, you can change the theme, and then I also recommend making sure that it starts with Windows. So let's go ahead and enable that option, and then also we're going to adjust the max TDP to 25 watts. Now if we go back into the main panel here, we can adjust both the sustained and the boot TDPs. What this means is we can set it to 12 watts normally, but then 25 if it needs it. And we'll play around with these settings here later in this video to show you what it means when we're actually playing a game. Now additionally, the power control panel works with that custom resolution utility that we were using earlier. And so in addition to the 720p resolution that we saw earlier, it also recognizes the 540p as well. That being said, you never want to change it to 540p here in this menu. You want to do that within each game. But one of the other things you can do is adjust the display refresh rate from 60 to 40 Hz right here on the fly. Now there are some options for display scaling as well. That's going to adjust the size of the text within the menus. I honestly just keep this one at default. And so yeah, in a nutshell, that's what Power Control Panel can do. However, one of the coolest things about it is that if you minimize it, it goes into the system tray and you can still access it. But it also has some really handy shortcuts. If you press L1 and R1 and down, it's going to bring up its own on-screen keyboard. And in addition to being very touchscreen friendly, you can also use the analog sticks to kind of move things around, much like how you can on the Steam Deck. And so once you get the hang of this, you can actually type really fast on here. Additionally, if you hold L1 and R1 and right on the D-pad, it'll bring up a side menu here. And so what you can do is adjust the TDP or the refresh rate or the brightness right here on the screen without having to get out of your game. And that is a real game changer when you want to tweak your settings. And so really that's about it when it comes to the tweaks. Now let's actually put them into action and see what we can do. I'm going to start up Steam here and then get into big picture mode. And then I'm just going to go ahead and browse my library here. Now I've added some non-Steam games from itch.io and GOG and things like that, but it is nice to have them all in one menu that I can navigate with my D-pad. Of course, you could use other solutions like Play Night or Launchbox, but for now I'm just sticking with the simple one here within Steam. So let's get to the games and actually show you how to use all these tweaks to make sure you get the best performance. For example, here I'm running Castle Crashers at the native 720p resolution and just the default settings, but at a 9-watt TDP. And as you can see here, it's running at 300 frames per second, which is way more than we need considering that the screen only goes up to 60. So what that means is we don't need to have this much power to run this game. So we're going to open up that side menu here on the right, and I'm going to adjust the TDP down from 9 watts all the way to the very lowest, which is 5 watts altogether. Now sometimes when you leave this control panel, it'll actually take you right back to the Steam interface instead of the game. And so what you want to do here is press the Windows button to bring up the bottom menu and then just select Castle Crashers here. That'll take you right back into the game, but as you can see here, at a 5-watt TDP, it's still running at over 60 frames per second. Now we could take this even lower, but obviously the device doesn't allow you to do that. But either way, it's nice to see that you can run this game at a 5-watt TDP and you're still going to have very smooth gameplay at 60 frames per second. And you might be surprised to find which games will actually run at a 5-watt TDP. For example, with Celeste, here it is at 9 watts again, and it's running really well, very stable at 60. So let's go through all that again. We're going to press L1 and R1 and right on the D-pad to bring up the side menu, and then I'm going to adjust the TDP down from 9 watts to 5. And would you look at that, it's still running at 60 frames. It is dipping down to 59, 58 every once in a while, but still completely playable. And so when it comes down to it, for a lot of these lightweight games, what I recommend doing is setting them to 9-watt TDP, and then if it's running really smoothly, see if you can bump it down to 5 watts instead. Now some games like Horizon Chase actually doesn't do very well at 5 watts, but it's super stable at 9. And a 9-watt TDP is actually very good for this device. It'll give you about 2.5 hours of gameplay altogether. And so here, with just one simple tweak from the stock experience, we're now able to extend the battery life from about 2 hours to 2.5. And this is going to generally work with most of your 2D games, platformers, indie games, things like that. Now some games are not going to do well at 9-watt TDP. Hades is a great example. This one will still play pretty well, but as you can see, it's averaging about 48 frames per second instead of the typical 60. And so now is a good time to talk about some of the other options that we have available. Number one is we can adjust the TDP to be beyond 9 watts. For example, here I've adjusted it to 12 watts while keeping it at 720p resolution and 60 frames per second. And yeah, sure enough, at 12 watts, we are getting a stable 60 frames per second. But of course, with a higher TDP, it is going to cause some battery life issues. For example, with this game, it lasted 1 hour and 56 minutes at the 12-watt TDP. And so what I recommend doing here instead, let's change it back to 9-watt TDP, but then adjust the refresh rate to 40 instead of 60. And so here we are with 9-watt TDP with a 40 Hz or 40 frames per second, and it's running just fine. In fact, 40 frames per second is really nice and smooth. It looks a lot better than 30 frames per second. And so it turns out this is the setting I ended up using the most. 40 frames per second actually looks very pleasing to the eye, and honestly, I couldn't really discern the difference between this and 60. And so with a game like Hades, that means I can run this for about 2.5 hours at 40 frames. And it works even better for some of those games that don't do very well at 5 watts. For example, SteamWorld Dig 2 here doesn't do very good with 60 frames per second at 5 watts, but it does great with 40. In fact, I did a full run of this as well, and it lasted 3 hours and 42 minutes. And you know, I was surprised at the amount of time I was able to squeeze out of this as well. That was nearly 4 hours of gameplay at 5 watts. And for me, that's great. Personally, I think that a handheld should last about 4 hours. That's kind of my threshold. And the fact that this device is capable of getting pretty close to that is pretty cool. Now, one thing to note is that some of these games do not play well at 40 Hz. For example, Shovel Knight and Sonic Mania will play like they're in slow motion. And that's because by default, these games will have VSync enabled. So just go into the options and then the video settings here and then turn off VSync. And after that, the games will play nice and smooth. So if you're playing a game and it just seems to be kind of slow, this is why. Additionally, if you try to run an emulator at 40 Hz, for example with RetroArch, it's also going to be slow as well. So be sure to change that back to 60. And so across the board, depending on what game you're playing, I do recommend trying out 40 Hz to see what kind of TDP you can get. For example, Ori and the Blind Forest at 60 frames per second needs about 12 to 15 watts altogether to run at full speed. But if you adjust it to 40 Hz, you can play it at 9-watt TDP instead, which means you're going to get about 2.5 hours of battery life here. On a similar note, you can play Portal 2 at 9-watt TDP as well. The frame rate is going to jump up and down as you're playing it, but the gameplay itself will be nice and smooth. And so yeah, overall, when it comes to lightweight 2D platformers and some of those lightweight 3D games as well, you should be able to get 9-watt TDP at 40 frames. Now, for some of those harder to run games, things that are from like say the Xbox 360 era, you may have to bump that up to 12-watt TDP instead. And so let me show you some examples here as I kind of run through some games. For example, Assassin's Creed 2, which I'm showing here at the default settings, actually runs at a 12-watt TDP and is relatively smooth as well. If you go into the video options section and change the presets to some of the lower settings, you'll actually get better frame rates in this too. For games that have a little bit of stutter at a 12-watt TDP, what I recommend doing is changing it to a 12-watt TDP sustained and then a 15-watt boost. That means that in general, it'll run at 12 watts, but when it needs it, it can bump it up to 15 here and there. And this is going to likely affect the battery life as well. I would expect to get a little bit less than 2 hours with this setting. But I was surprised to find that many games from the Xbox 360 era played with these settings really well. In fact, I'm just going to let a few of them run through here so you can see the performance. Now, if you want to play some of the more modern games, what I recommend doing is going into the video settings and see if it supports a 960 by 540 resolution. And if it does, in addition to all the tweaks we talked about before, I would recommend changing that to see if it works. A good example here is Ori and the Will of the Wisps. This game is only a couple years old, but if you play it at a 540p resolution and then adjust the settings to be low, and then set the TDP to 15 watts with a 20-watt boost and a 40 Hz refresh rate, you get some pretty nice gameplay. It's not going to be perfect, and some of the sound is going to be a little bit weird. Let me play it for you here. So yeah, definitely not perfect, but all the same, it is relatively playable. And so really that's about it for this video. I wanted to show you some of the tweaks you can do within Windows to find a balance between battery life, power, and performance. And I think with the tools that I showed you here in this guide, there's a lot of room to work with here. At the end of the day, the issues with the Win600 are still present. You know, the ergonomics are not great, I hate the fact that it only has single channel RAM, and the price to performance is pretty lousy. But at the very least, I hope that these tweaks will help you get more bang for your buck. So let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.